Hello and welcome, I'm Tafara Gadamu. This evening I'll be joined by Dr. Ayele Bekerie, a historian, to discuss the significance of the Battle of Adwa, which took place 129 years ago this week. As we mark Adwa Victory Day, Dr. Ayele will share his insight into how this historic victory also inspired anti-colonial movements across the African continent. We'll also explore the lasting legacy of Adwa. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It happened on March 2nd, right?
Yeah.
But it was...
This time I think it's March 1st.
Was it March 1st? Yeah, it was that final day.
In the leap year, it becomes March 2nd.
March 2nd.
Yeah.
So it was a day-long battle, right?
Yeah, it took only 1 day, that's it. It was over by 6 p.m.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was building up, right? For many years.
That's true. I think you could say even starting from the time of the Berlin Conference, 1884-85, the Italians had to participate in that big scramble. And so therefore, you could say from that time onward, especially after they constructed the rules of engagement, that the Italians, they were targeting the Horn of Africa. So to them, even after they completely colonized Eritrea, it was not sufficient, it was not enough. So therefore, they have to conquer the whole Eritrea plus, the rest of Ethiopia.
They were basically biding their time.
Exactly. So they implemented a diplomatic approach, implemented a whole range of approach. Like, for instance, it was probably in the 19th century, we had more spies from Italy as compared to, say, England or France. You had so many spies. They were actually inserting themselves to every noble, to every prince that they find in Ethiopia. So therefore, that was, part of their strategic approach, ultimate purpose being, conquering Ethiopia.
So what was the factors that led to an Ethiopian victory defining?
Well, you see, that's a very good question. The victory is not accidental. It was not what we call, just a chance happening. No, actually, Ethiopians were engaged. Like, if you think of Menelik, by the time Menelik took over, we have to think of Emperor Johannes IV. We have to think of Theodore or Theodros, Dagmawi Theodros. When you think of them, they were struggling, one, to establish themselves as a king of kings. And then, so that's very critical, because for that they have to engage in several battles, in several wars. So you have to accumulate all that experience. And so by the time you reach the time of Menelik, which is like the second part of 19th century and the early 20th century, we're talking about hardened army, Sarawit, we call it in Amharic. So hardened, able to fight, and then very, very loyal to their nobilities.
And where numbers also matter.
Number matters. Actually, one of our strategies was to overwhelm the Italians, having, we had almost 200,000. Not all of them were fighters. The fighters were not, especially the ones who have guns, maybe 50,000 or so. But the rest, they brought their own weapons. That weapon could be just simple lance and shield, or they may have their own guns, the guns of the time. But at any rate, what is critical was, with all that experience, being able, also the second part, the most important part is knowing the enemy. Knowing the enemy, meaning like they had their own spies. Of course, spies serve both sides, but the most critical part is who got the last information, the most decisive information.
So the Ethiopians, you say, had the upper hand in this respect?
Oh, yes. Our alum was the one who informed Emperor Menelik and Empress Taitu is that the Italians had got out of their fortress. They are on their way to attack the Ethiopian side. That last information was given to the Ethiopian side, not to the Italian side. And then once they knew that they were, coming to attack, then, of course, by then they were prepared. You see, you asked me how did they manage to become victorious? They managed to become victorious because they knew the enemy, they knew what kind of weapons the enemy had, and so therefore they were able to gather those weapons either by outright purchasing them or by donation, especially from Russia, from Turkey, from France. So they had scientific preparation to that war. Since they knew the enemy, the engagement was not Adwa. Adwa was the final, the culmination of the whole battles. But we had battles at Ambalage, Mekelle. I know all of them. In fact, we could go back and then in Eritrean part, like we had Kwatit, Sanafe.
Gundat and all.
Yeah, Gundat and Gura were during the time of Emperor Johannes. Yeah, but they count. That's exactly
in the memory.
Exactly, that's what I was trying to share with you in terms of all the experiences and they being very hardened. So the Italians were not new, it's not new. But on the other hand, the Italians had a lot of disrespect. They even had the maximum that you could think of in terms of the Italians was about 15,000. And out of that 15,000, you had almost half of them were local, Eritreans.
Askaris.
They call them Askaris, but they were local people, So that was they underestimated the ability of Ethiopians to fight back and then be able to defeat them.
They were also misled, right?
Exactly. They assumed because the Brits did it, the French did it, the Belgians did it elsewhere in Africa, they assumed that one or two brigades will be sufficient for them to defeat the Ethiopian army. Even though of all the battles that the Ethiopians engaged with the Italians, including, as you pointed out earlier, Gundat, Gura, Dogali, and then you have Halai. Halai was a battle led by Bahata Hagos, Ethiopian patriot, because at that time, at least, he was an Ethiopian patriot. It was later even the Eritreans themselves started to kind of recognize him as an anti-colonialist at a later date after, they evaluated the kind of information that they had. But at any rate, you have Halai, you have Kwatit, you have Sanafe, you have Debra Haila, see all this, Ambalage, and then, of course, the fortress in Anda Jesus fortress at Mekelle. So in all this, the Italians should have learned a lesson. That lesson is that the Ethiopians will not stop until that enemy is out of their territory.
Interesting. So the casualties were massive, right?
It was massive. Both sides, actually, was massive. We're talking about between 7,000 and 8,000, between 7,000 and 9,000 patriots, both sides. Right. Actually, the Italian side was much bigger, much larger. And then they lost what? 3 generals, lots of colonels. I think it was a big loss for the Italians.
And also several taken prisoner.
Exactly. And then once they surrendered, they were taken back to Addis. And what's interesting is that's, I think, the nature of conflict. When you are in conflict, you become very, what's the term?
Merciless,
brutal.
And deadly.
Exactly. But the moment it's over and then the situation changed, then even those, Italians, what's the term?
The prisoners of war?
Prisoners of war, that's right. Once they became prisoners of war, what happened? They started building roads and so on and so forth. And then a good chunk of them decided not to return back to Italy. They decided to stay, And then, of course, ultimately, if you really look at it in terms of the time span, the time, from the time of the battle and now we're talking about Italians building the largest dam in Africa.
Connection there.
See, I think that's a big lesson for local issues. Local issues can also be resolved, should be resolved peacefully without engaging into armed fighting.
What is the significance of this battle, you think?
Well, you see, we didn't fight the Italians. We fought a system which was established to colonize, a system of colonization. So you have a system of colonization that has to be challenged, and then Ethiopians succeeded in challenging them effectively by defeating the Italians. So therefore, it was white supremacy that we were fighting against. It was also the right for your land and the right for yourself, for your personhood. Those are the principles in which that the Ethiopians fought against the Italians, because we didn't go to Italy. The Italians were the ones who came all the way to take over our land and to take away our freedom. So therefore, in that sense, it has, the significance is that upholding what I call universal values, universal principles. So that's what and then, of course, in the immediate effect, it has inspired those who are fighting against colonialism.
You mean across the African continent? It resonated very well.
Elsewhere, exactly. It allowed them to continue fighting, because if we win, they should be in a position also to win. So it inspired anti-colonial movements. And so that's also very significant, in terms of, Europe was almost on the verge of taking over the entire Africa, its people and its resources. And the first chapter to say, no, you can't do it, was Adwa. So therefore, in that sense, Adwa is universally significant.
And a very effective tool.
A very effective tool, that's right. And because it was only, we can't say all of them started after Adwa, because there were some movements before Adwa. In South Africa, for instance, the Zulus were able to defeat the Brits. There are several cases, and then even the nature of the resistance, when in some places like in Mali, Modibo Keita, before him, the leader before him, in the Battle of Algiers. And then you could have a whole sort of examples in the Congo. It is a use of religion to fight against colonialism. So there were several struggles. The Ghanaians, in which the Brits took even their cultural, political symbols, the stool, the golden stool, which signifies power, political power, was taken to England and then kind of placed in the British Museum. So you have a whole range of resistance against it, and it has also become instrumental in the establishment of Pan-African movements. The first Congress that took place was in 1900, and so that's, 1900, I think 14 years in between, the Battle of Adwa. So this is what it symbolizes, because it really has inspired particularly black people to kind of say the only way that people, especially black people, should live is a free life. Life of freedom is important, and then it's God-given. And so no one should decide who should be free and who shouldn't be. And so in that sense, I think Pan-Africanism has benefited, from the victory at the Battle of Adwa.
Is the story of the Battle of Adwa told the way it should?
I believe there are a whole lot of deeds that we were not able to. I think, to me, the question was, have we collected enough materials from the battle to write solid narratives regarding the battle. I think that should be, because...
That brings me to your role as scholars
Exactly.
and Africans in Ethiopia.
See, for instance, we always give estimates about how many patriots sacrificed their lives. We don't know because we never kind of took count of, how we haven't established the system to do that. So therefore, we rely on the Italian sources. Even for that, and most of our information come from Italian sources. Naturally, battles have two sides, and so you have two sets of information. So our information is very, very limited. And then we didn't have that many writers, documentarians, who are able to kind of collect information immediately or during the battle. So therefore, in that regard, no, the story, as in a whole sense, was not told. But even from what we have, I think, to me, what the Ethiopians did is I'm an Ethiopian, but when I say it, it's not because that I'm chauvinistic, but it was spectacular.
It definitely was, but the story is not, the stories are not being told in schools, taught in school.
Oh, yeah,
and so on and so forth. And as you alluded to very well, enough research has never been undertaken on this. We don't even have a center after that.
That's true. And we also have to depend on the political mood of the moment. Yeah. So the political mood determines whether even that we are in a position to celebrate annually this victory. And then I remember the first time that I went to Adwa, I was excited to see some kind of memorial, some kind of monument or something. Nothing, virtually none whatsoever. And that's frightening. And I think it is to that extent that we have neglected that important victory, which has become central to so many movements, and not only in Africa, even elsewhere in the Caribbean and in South America. So therefore, I think, to me, you see a trend now trying to kind of, know more about the battle and know more about the battle, its significance, its symbolism, its universality. So people are kind of moving towards able to dig.
There were plans to establish a Pan-African University at Adwa. What is stand today?
Well, I think, to me, my hope is that sooner or later, of course I prefer sooner than later, that the university will become a reality. And I think it became a victim of, our internal issues, so therefore, during the war, it was interrupted, the kind of project that we started. I think we have already secured the land for the university. And then, we had at least a few congresses, a few conferences in which we invited people to kind of provide them with information in terms of what kind of university it's going to become. The concept paper has already been, has been given to them. And then it has to be a big project. Right. Just like the establishment of the memorial for
here in Addis Ababa.
That's not enough. I think ultimately, because, who fought at the Battle of Adwa? Everybody, no exception. South, north, east, west, everybody fought. So therefore, they have the right of ownership. All Ethiopians have the right of ownership. And so therefore, I think when you think it in that sense, that Pan-African University is a university with a focus on African issues, with a focus African diaspora issues, with a focus. So imagine having a university with a capacity to say, for instance, publish journals, have curriculum in which that the stories, our stories are reflected in that curriculum. And then it's done in such a way that you have young people who are able to kind of utilize that. Of course, ultimately, it has to be used for the purpose of transforming yourself, transforming your society, being in a position for you to sit at the same and share the same table with the rest of the world. It's a kind of an advanced university with advanced curriculum, being able to invite students from all parts of Africa, not just simply Ethiopia. So if you do that, then I think you are kind of, in a way, continuing the lessons of Adwa, the Battle of Adwa. My sense, my hope is that sooner or later, those who were supposed to cooperate will cooperate, and then this university is going to become a reality. I fully support it's being built.
So, do you think scholars should lead the way in not just this one, but in many other aspects as far as the Battle of Adwa is concerned?
I agree. I think even the issue of the Pan-African University in Adwa, I think it should be taken by, just like reparation is taken over by African Union. I think this establishment of this Pan-African University should become an issue that should concern and should involve all our African brothers and sisters wherever they are.
Are the Ethiopian young connected to this story?
Well, not really. Not really. Even though, you remember, like some 10 years ago, there were young people who decided to have a better understanding of the battle. So they decided to have what they call the journey to Adwa on foot. See, those guys were doing a remarkable job, because on their way to Adwa, they were stopping at Mekelle University. And then I remember when they arrive at Mekelle University, we will welcome them, and then we will have a forum. I remember that. And they were telling us that, perhaps they walk for 80 hours or so, and then they stop, and then they invite the community where they stopped, and then they all would have lessons of the battle. And then they do that all along. And then by the time that they return to Addis, these guys were completely different persons. And it was really a very beautiful exercise. And I think those are the kind of things that we have to do, to make, as I pointed out to you earlier, we may not have done what we're supposed to do in terms of being able to utilize the victory to our transformation. But the victory is final. The victory is forever. So therefore, if my generation may be...
But the story never stops there.
Exactly. My generation might not have utilized the symbolism, the value, the significance of Adwa as much as it's supposed to, but I believe that there will come another generation who might have a better understanding, and then therefore utilizing that information to create, yes, highly diversified, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, but it shouldn't be on the basis of building walls between, ethnic groups or religious groups. So therefore, I think that you could have your culture, and then you could share that culture with the others, and vice versa. And in so doing, I think, to me, our beauty lies in the fact that we are highly diversified. There was no one group that completely wiped out the rest and therefore imposed its language or religion or culture. So therefore, I think having that it becomes a natural democratic process. What you have to do is to make sure that all of them flourish at the same time, So in as long as my sense is that there will come a generation that will have a good grasp of that and be able to utilize it to advance our people, to transform our people, and then, hopefully, not to see especially poverty. Poverty perpetuates ignorance, Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ayele. It was really a pleasure having you on my show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.